So the reason I started this channel was because I needed to find a community. And I had recently, at the time of starting the channel, decided to take my health and my life into my own hands. And I wanted to spread awareness, by sharing my story of all the things I'm starting to find out now that I'm getting into my 40s. Mid 40s. The misdiagnoses, the gaslighting, it's all real. And I'm seeing more and more people finally starting to, be able to speak up for themselves, advocate for themselves. And it's given me a lot of inspiration and motivation to finally be able to start using my voice. Because even speaking out loud to myself is hard. When you're telling somebody about yourself, or they're asking you about your story, or, it just ends up being all these things that you feel like you have to explain away. Why you, seem like you're so goofy. Why you always look high. Shit like that. Anyway, I had to pause that thought for a moment. But when you end up having to explain so much to people, or even just when they, are genuinely curious about your story, and you start telling them all the things that you've been through, all the things that's happened to you, that you've experienced, witnessed, whatever, it can start to sound and feel like you're just making excuses for everything. Like, why can't I remember anything? Oh, well, it's because, turns out all the ear infections and strep throat I had constantly as a kid until they took my tonsils out at 12. Turns out that caused hearing problems that I didn't realize I was having. Apparently you can have all kinds of hearing loss, hearing problems, and you don't realize it. And that causes processing problems, when you're trying to focus on what's being said, and you've got all these other noises because your ears have gotten fucked up for whatever reason. And so it changes the way you hear, it changes the way frequencies and different sounds hit you. And sometimes that just builds up slowly over time and you don't realize it's happening until it becomes unmanageable. But then you find out, this was a few years ago that I, found out, just how bad that can really affect you. So, that can affect your memory. It can dysregulate your entire nervous system because your body's just being pinged and, you can't regulate yourself. And that's also another reason why, people are fidgety, or I've been recently learning about the ADHD walker, the ADHD sway. It's because your body is actually trying to regulate itself, and you just don't realize all these things. And it makes you feel and look crazy, and stuff like that. And then it's like, well, okay, you learn about it, you manage your hearing, whatever, you learn to be able to tune shit out or whatever, but and it's like, well, you got all these other reasons. In my case, I've had anaphylaxis quite a few times for some reason. I wasn't making the connection because I wasn't getting oxygen to my brain. But for some reason, it took 3 trips in 1 week to the ER in anaphylactic shock for them to connect to the fact that, my antibiotics were causing me to have an allergic reaction, even though that's something that had never happened before. But because at the time, I was in between surgeries, and I was still sick during the second one on my feet. 2 of the 9-foot surgeries, it turns out, were a bad idea. Anyway, I digress. I'm forgetting where I'm going. Damn it, you see? Oh yeah. during that time, I had gotten the flu, mono, and strep throat all at once. And apparently having mono, or really anything, can trigger your body to become allergic to things that you were not allergic to before. Like I said, had I been getting the proper oxygen to my brain, I would have made the connection instantly, because, you know, I would take my antibiotics, and then about 20 minutes later, I would feel my throat starting to close up. You know, and you just feel it swelling, and you see your vision going black. You know, it's like a tunnel, and it just gets darker and darker. And it feels like you're trying to breathe through the tiniest little straw. And it's so fucking scary. And then you get rushed to the hospital, to the ER. They pump you full of shit. You know, you're stepping outside of your body, looking at yourself. You're watching your life, you know, project onto the screen that's suddenly in front of you. You're watching your past. You're watching your current, present. And then you watch the future that you just know you're about to miss, because you're laying there fucking dying. That happened in three times in 1 week. And so, you know, I tried, you know, years and years. That was back in 2016, 2017. So I wonder how much, you know, because that was happening for a good month or so. I would be walking just this much, get out of breath. I'd have to use a cane to hold myself up. Not because of my foot surgeries, but because I was just so weak. Talking more than a few words, I couldn't even finish a sentence without getting completely out of breath. Not only forgetting what I was saying, forgetting who I was talking to, why I was talking to, forgetting where I was, why I was there. That's the scariest fucking feeling in the world. And people are just standing there looking at you while, you know, your face just suddenly goes blank. You don't know where the fuck you are. And, you know, so there's that. And then, you know, last summer, you know, to put the icing on the cake of, you know, causing memory problems and dysregulation issues, I fell flat on my back and hit my head. Oh my God, I hit my head so hard. And then, because my pupils weren't properly reacting, my retinas got damaged, burned by the sun, even though I just quickly, you know, accidentally glanced up after I'd come up out of a pool. They thought that my retinas were going to detach. After I started fasting, switched from table salt to sea salt, you know, I'll share more details on that. But, you know, if you all have been, you know, watching me here or on True Skill 710 channel, you know the story. But, my retinas somehow healed after a few months. I don't know, you know, I'm not saying it was because of the fasting. I'm just saying what I did and then what I experienced. The doctors were shocked because they told me it would take at least a year to a year and a half before I even started noticing any kind of healing. Take it for what it's worth. It's just my experience. But, you know, so there's, you know, another reason, you know, why I have memory problems or brain fog. And when you hit the back of your head, that affects your visual processing and, you know, just all kinds of fucking stuff. And then just the fact that I'm, you know, a female, you know, ladies, you know how it is. Everything really kind of sucks for us. And we're constantly misdiagnosed. And then when we finally find out we have an autoimmune disorder or something, it's been years and years and years. Or we find out it's because, you know, we're at that age and it's perimenopause. But for most of us, it just seems like at this point it's a whole lifetime worth of shit just built up, you know. It makes you look crazy. Last summer, I was pushing 185 pounds. I could not walk. I was about a year and a half post a hysterectomy, and it wasn't just a hysterectomy because I had so many prior abdominal surgeries, including 2 C-sections. My entire was just full of scar tissue that was so bad I had to go to a cancer specialist because they had a 6-armed robot and they cut 6, across the top of my stomach and one on my belly button. Every surgery I've ever had on my stomach, they always got the fucking belly button. I get it, but I'm so sick of being cut on, y'all. And the doctors just... Anyway. So my hysterectomy took like 2 hours. They had to work their way down, cut out all the webbed scar tissue and everything. And before I had that surgery, which I had begged for like a good 10 years to have, but because I was still in childbearing age, even though my tubes were tied, doctors thought I might change my mind, even though the reason I got my tubes tied was, 1, I was done having kids. I already had my 2 little angels. It was good. But 2, my doctor told me, he's like, yeah, pregnancy does not get along with you. It would be very, very, very dangerous, after the problems with the first 2. So, there was no reason. I was just getting worse and worse and worse. But then by the time I got to this, had to be referred to this specialist. First of all, he's like, why are you even here? You don't have cancer. And I'm like, you know why I'm here. You have my file. You've read it. Your nurse read it. Your nurse practitioner read it. They've referred, you see people who don't have cancer because you have the machine for the, surgery that is now needed because they wouldn't do the proper shit years ago. It's just crazy. And so before my surgery, I couldn't stand up straight and I couldn't bend all the way over. Not just, from being overweight, but because of all that going on. And then so for a good year and a half after I had that surgery, my stomach was still, I still couldn't stand up straight. I couldn't breathe right. And, it just... When I found True Skills 710 channel, I learned how to breathe again. And that is one of the best feelings in the world. And when I started, right before I found his channel, I started sugar fasting, cutting out processed foods and sugar. Because I had seen some people really transform and get rid of inflammation. And so I noticed inflammation started coming off, and then I started fasting and, autophagy and all that. And my stomach, slowly I felt it loosening up. I felt all the scar tissue releasing, and, I started not just losing weight all over, but I started getting my stomach back. And I actually have muscles now. When your stomach's, first of all, when you're pregnant, your muscles get torn all to shreds anyway. But then when you've had so many surgeries, every time you get cut on, it makes it harder for that muscle to come back and heal. And then when you finally start to feel better for the first time, it can make you look like you're high. It can make you look like, you're just fucking on speed, because that's what life flowing through you feels like, only it feels good, it feels natural. It does look dramatic when you lose a lot of weight. It really looks dramatic. I don't recognize myself, but that's for the better. But it is very shocking when I go back and look at me, just even from a year ago. I can't believe it. And I'll try to find some old pictures and stuff of me. I was never very much for allowing pictures to be taken, but, I'll find a few so you can kind of see the difference. But, and there's just other bullshit, too. My whole life, everybody's like, oh, you look high, you look tired, you look sad, you look sick, your eyes, why don't they open all the way? Well, and it's just, another silly little thing that you learn about later is because, oh, I have hooded eyelids. I didn't know what that was. Apparently, that's why my eyes, practically closed. Whatever. it's just my face, y'all. And I really, after, you know, all these years, I don't get the fascination with it, or why people insist something that's not true just because of how somebody looks or how life has made them look. It's really fucking pathetic. But anyway, this went on a ramble. Like, probably everything is gonna be. I appreciate everybody for sticking around, and, you know, all your encouragement and support. I started doing this because I saw other people start doing it, and it's helped me find better resources, better information, better motivation to heal myself. And it really doesn't take much. It really, 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 really does not take much. The biggest thing it takes is that you're just sick and tired of being sick and fucking tired, and it's time to make a change so much that you cannot vibe with that bullshit anymore, and it literally forces you out. You just, you know, sometimes it just gets to that point. Sometimes it just takes some good hydration to start seeing and thinking clearly, and a little bit of fresh breath. So, you know, I want to keep sharing my story. Part of it is for my, you know, my own documentation purposes, trying to, you know, figure things out, connect the dots. But also, I want to spread awareness that, you know, just because someone is a doctor or a medical professional, and I've been a medical professional, I worked in healthcare for, you know, quite a while, doing many different things. You know, I started off as a phlebotomist, you know, then I went into medical assisting, ran front office, medical records. So I've seen a lot. You know, I wasn't a doctor or a nurse, but I saw more than enough from the medical side, the healthcare side, the workers side, of how they treat patients and what actually goes on behind the scenes, and it's fucking disgusting. And that's one reason why I got so burnt out, and I could never work in healthcare again. No matter how much I love to be able to take care of people, that's all I ever wanted to do, was to help people. You know, it's in my nature. But the current medical system, the way it is, it's not set up for people who actually care. It's not set up for people who actually want to heal others. It's set up purely for profit. And there is no profit in a healthy population. Stay shiny, y'all.